Welcome back to the Overflowing Life podcast. I'm excited to get this season off the ground. And as always, I'm here with my co-host, Adrian Fraser. How are you, Adrian?
Hi, Chris. I'm doing great. Hi, everyone.
All right. Well, so it's a big day. You and I have been talking about this topic for a while and the topics we're going to cover. So I'm really excited to kind of get this off the ground. So listen, this season is all about understanding, have we lost our souls to the modern world? And if so, what do we do about that? So, Adrian, have we lost our souls in the digitally fast paced, dominated, crazy, distracted culture we live in today?
You're starting with the $1 million question. I think it's a
I
slippery
am.
slope. I think it's probably a little bit yes and a little bit no, depending on the person, depending on the life circumstances and the environment that they're in. One of the things that I've been
Mm-hmm.
thinking about, I think, is the blessing and the curse of technology. And so,
Mm-hmm.
on the one hand, it makes things so much easier, so much faster, so much efficient. We are able to connect with people that we've never been able to connect with. If I have popcorn brain and I just want to investigate 5 different things, I can just grab out my phone and figure it all out in 5 minutes. But at the same time, it's a huge distraction too. And how many times have we
Mm,
observed people who want to have conversations and one person is on their phone, or we're in meetings and
mm,
somebody's texting? I think it can be really disheartening when we are constantly tied to our technology. So, are we losing our souls to technology? I think it's probably a little bit yes. But I also think that with some self awareness and some guardrails, we could maybe reverse
mm.
that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that perspective. As I was originally thinking about this topic, I've been observing for the last 3 or so years, maybe a little bit longer, as I've coached business owners, that there was something wrong. There was something that wasn't right. I don't know if it wasn't wrong, but it wasn't right. That my clients were constantly coming back to me, and they're coming to the calls stressed out, frazzled, like they couldn't catch up. They couldn't catch their breath.
Mm.
And I've seen that time and time again. And as I've listened to a lot of people talk about this, I've asked people in Ubers as I've traveled, like, how has their experience been, especially since COVID? And the weird thing that happened there, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But how are you feeling about things? Do you feel like your life is in a good place? Do you know who you are? Are you connected with yourself? And you know, it definitely feels like we are. Now, whether it's just, I don't think it's just to technology. I actually think it's also to, I think what contributes to it is the pace at which things are changing, right? And so, never before have things been iterated and changed and updated as quickly as they have been. And a really favorite author of mine, a guy named David Benner, mentioned in an article I read recently that the article was titled "An Interview with a Master Teacher," and he's a psychologist, and I believe he's a Christian spiritual director, spiritual formation director. But he said that the soul is the middle ground between matter and spirit, body and mind, thinking and feeling. The soul is our capacity for self-reflection and self-knowing, and the soul stands as a bridge between the lower and higher realms of human personhood. And without the soul at the center, will always be less fully functioning human beings.
Hmm.
So, what does that make you think of? Put you on the spot here.
Oh, wow. Oh, I think it's important that we stay in touch with our souls.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back and ask you what you had brought up about change, though, and how
Mm-hmm.
quickly things are evolving. And are
Mm,
the people who are more comfortable with change, are they the ones who are
mm,
more inclined to stay connected with their
mm,
souls and to embrace the change and maybe become a little bit more fluid with it versus the people who really struggle with change and who bristle against it and who say, well, this is the way it's always been done. And, they just get steeped into
mm.
clinging to the past or resisting change. Or they may be a little bit, is it harder for them to
Yeah.
stay connected to who they are and their souls? So
Mm.
yeah, that's a pretty deep passage.
Yeah. And what I love about it is the idea of what is the soul. I don't, even in religious circles, it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what is that. But I love how he defined it as the middle ground between matter and spirit. And
Mhm.
it's our capacity for self-reflection and self-knowing. What I've observed is how we've kind of outsourced our ability to manage our consciousness, right? So instead of, what I mean by that is, instead of sitting and feeling the emotion that comes up from an instance or a situation,
Mm,
we just pick up our phone and distract
yeah.
ourselves, right? So we're not facing that, right? So that capacity for self-reflection and self-knowing has kind of disappeared. And so how do we deal with change if it's happening faster and faster, which most human beings don't like change. We know that.
Right. Right.
And so, our ability to deal with that really stems and hinges on our ability for self-reflection and self-knowing. And if we're losing that to distraction and hurry, that's a problem.
Yeah, I wonder too. And as we were kind of preparing for this episode, thinking about um, why are people so addicted to their phones, right? And what
Mm,
is it that they
mm,
are numbing by using their phones constantly? And how are they not creating space to sit and be reflective and to really feel what it is they're feeling? Because you pick up their phone and it's either the instant distraction or you get that ping, beep, bloop, whatever, which
mm-hmm,
then gives you that really quick dopamine hit because you just got
mm.
something that just gives you that little zing that makes you feel good, and it just continues this perpetual distraction. And so I think it's hard to enter into that level of self-awareness and self-reflection when we have so many technology distractions around us. Do you find that that's true? Do you experience that in your life?
It's funny you asked that, because I forgot to put my phone on do not disturb before we started this, and I just got like this text message from somebody, so I'm like, do not disturb, got to put it on. So of course I do, and and it's so what you had asked about, instead of sitting and being present, we're distracting ourselves, and that's nothing new, right? It's just the phone is new, the smartphone is new, and the fact
Mhm.
that it's engineered to distract us and grab our attention is new.
On
We've
purpose.
been doing that. Yes, right. I know. I mean, there's plenty of documentaries out there that have shared that, and the it's just, we used to do that with other things, whether it was always being busy, which we still do today. And so,
Mhm.
that's just one aspect of this. And Adrian, what I've found is that, um, in addition to the smartphone and that distraction and not being present to ourselves, it exacerbates an issue, especially for business owners and leaders, where there's a lot of fear there. There's a lot of pain associated with a lot of, pain is inevitable. We can't avoid pain, and well, we can avoid pain, but it happens, right? And when we continue
Mhm.
to avoid it and avoid it and avoid it, we we're just so, we get so busy, we ignore it. I was actually watching Ted Lasso again, and there was an episode where he goes to the psychologist for the team. For those of you that have seen it, and I
Mhm.
just was watching him distract himself from his pain as he's like working towards sitting down with her, and it was really amazing to watch that just play out in front of me. That he was avoiding his pain by like being
Yeah.
sarcastic and by looking at different things in our office, that bird that goes up and down or
Yep.
whatever. And it was just fascinating to watch.
It's so hard
So
for people to enter into those uncomfortable feelings, right? And
mhm.
so, especially when we have a phone or something else to distract us, or I know exactly which Ted Lasso episode you're talking about, the birdie, right? That dips
Yep.
up and down. Yeah, I mean, how do we get past that? How do we realize that that's a necessary part of life that we have
Yeah.
to enter into order to become healthier versions of ourselves?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me actually lay out a few symptoms of the problem, so that if you're listening, I want you to think about these things. And does this show up in your life, right? And then we'll get into some details about this. So, some of these symptoms, these is not an exhaustive list, but a couple of things I've gathered from a few books and articles. But always feeling pressure from having to do too much, that you don't have enough time and you're always rushing. That's one thing. Never ending stress leading to health issues, always stressed out, and that's coming up as either ulcers or worse. Your core relationships are deteriorating, right? Those ones that are at home or outside of work, they're just not going in a good direction. You're overly concerned with what other people think, or you're defensive or too easily offended. And then your identity is deeply tied to the business success or the success in the role that you're in. Maybe even you've gotten to the point where you're apathetic, you're feeling unenthusiastic or even threatened by the success of others. And then there's probably a lack of self-awareness. You're unsure of who you are and what really matters. Now, Adrian, I know that I have felt that for sure. And even right now, some of those things I'm like, yeah, I probably need to work on some of those. And I've
Mhm.
been working on them, but man, that has definitely shown up in my life. And now that, when I look at that, now I can be like, okay, if I'm defensive or easily offended by somebody else, that's a trigger point or a sign, a
Absolutely.
flag to be like, hey man,
Yep.
pay attention to this.
Yeah. And I would add too, the body keeps the score. And so
Oh
what kind
yeah.
of
Thank
physical
you.
symptoms are you having where, you constantly are experiencing tension in your body? Where, are you having headaches constantly? Are you eating poorly? Can you not sleep? What are the physical manifestations? I know for me, that was a really big clue to my burnout. I think I researched it a little bit and through some therapy realized that adrenal fatigue is actually a real
Mm,
thing too.
it
And so
is.
just to become aware of that and how do you start to fix that, thinking about basic needs is where you need to start. Like, are you feeding yourself well? Are you hydrating? Are you sleeping? If you're not doing those things, then you're probably experiencing some pretty severe burnout.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you talking about that because I'd really like to move into talking about, hey, there is a solution, right? And there's a way for us to resurrect our souls, so to speak, or reconnect to them and find genuine connection to that overflowing life. So, Adrian, let's just talk a little bit about this practically speaking, right? I would imagine that the folks listening, they felt what we've talked about. Right? When we talked about those things that have come up, the stress and hurry and feeling like you can never catch up. Let's just start to touch on, okay, well, what are the implications of that around how we show up in business and why does this even matter? I mean, look, Chris, Adrian, I've been going like a bat out of hell forever. I don't need sleep. I mean, shoot, I've heard Elon Musk brag about sleeping 2 hours a night or something silly like that. He's like, look, I don't need to slow down, right? That's not something I need to
Yeah.
do. So, you know, I think we would argue, mm,
Yeah.
no, I think there's something there to that. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think we even asked the question of, well, what's going to happen if you don't slow down? And maybe
Mm,
even thinking about, you know, what has happened because you haven't slowed down. And
mm.
maybe, I don't know, Chris, do you have a story? Stories are sticky. Do you have an example of, maybe in the time when you were really in the thick of that hurry and,
Mm.
a mistake that you made or how your creativity was stifled because, that's
Yeah.
typically where things begin.
Yeah. Well, you probably know this, but in case our listeners don't, the mind is an amazing tool, and fear kills creativity, right? And stress is a part of fear. And so, I can think back to a couple of times where, there was some, let's just say it's happened numerous times where somebody would reach out to me in my organization. Maybe they were, in various positions where they're like, hey, I really need to talk to you. And immediately, and this is where my ego kind of got involved, immediately I'd feel it in the pit of my stomach. And I was like, oh no, they hate me, or they're going to leave, or they're angry, or something like that. And because I was hurrying, in a lot of ways, I didn't slow down to really think about this and think about why am I being triggered this way? Why am I reacting that way? I immediately went to fear, and fear shuts down our ability to be creative, to innovate, to look for solutions. And so, that implication right there of me, for me to get out of my own way and think, well, look, I'm making up a story here. I don't need to do that. They just may need to talk about something very simple. It prevented me from really thinking that way. And so many times within business where I could think of where I was fearful about whether I was valuable or needed in a conversation. And I
Mhm.
just, man, I was not very good in that conversation, whether I wanted to control it or I couldn't come up with really good solutions because I was stuck in a state of fear.
Yeah, that's a great example. I was also thinking of in response to, what's going to happen if you don't slow down and if you don't
Mm,
take care of yourself. The whole putting your air mask or putting your oxygen mask on before helping others. I think so many business leaders, just so many humans want to be helpful. They give because they are caring people, they're kind, they're compassionate, they really want to be there to help others, to support others. But if they're not taking care of themselves, then they're not going to have anything to give. You can't
No.
give somebody something that you don't have. And so by
No.
just being aware that maybe you're kind of scraping the bottom of your barrel and knowing like maybe it's time to slow down or to do a digital detox or to just, as you keep saying, to reconnect with your soul, like you'll have more to give others when you take the time to do that.
Yeah. I heard a couple of things that I want to bring to light here. One is that you can't lead other people until you are detached from whether they approve or like you.
Mm,
And because if you think about that, like, man, if you are attached, that you need them to like you or approve of you, you're just going to do whatever it takes to get there. And I don't know, you can't lead that way. The other thing is that what you focus on, where you put your awareness, determines who you become tomorrow. So
mm,
if your awareness
that's
and your
great.
focus is either on your phone, like we've been talking about, or on whether somebody likes you, that is not going to lead you anywhere good. You're not being creative and innovative around who you are supposed to be and what the vision of your business and who you show up as. It's going to stifle that and really stunt that growth a lot,
Yeah,
within that.
absolutely.
So also life comes down to, I heard another coach say this the other day, that life is really nothing but awareness and choice.
Mm,
And without awareness of our emotions and thoughts, we can't change, right? We become captive to our habits. And with what we're talking about, when if we're not ruthlessly eliminating hurry from our lives, if we're not
mhm.
slowing down, if we're not reflecting, if we're not, we're going to talk about this later, taking time for silence and solitude and understanding what's really going on between our ears, that awareness will never happen. And I can tell you,
Right.
for a long time, one of the things the Enneagram did for me was to show me that I had put my heart in a box and I was paying no attention to it, which was
Mm,
impacting my personal relationships, how I showed up for my family, how I showed up for the people I led. It was not good at all. And so, once I became aware of that, it's like, oh, okay, I can make some different choices. But man, I'll tell you, becoming aware of things, Adrian, I don't know what your experience has been, but it's almost like raising yourself from the dead, because how do you become aware of something you have no awareness of, right? In a lot of ways, I needed a coach. I needed somebody from outside of me to speak that into me. And we used a tool, called the Enneagram,
mhm.
called the IQ9, to bring that awareness to me. Without that, I would have had no awareness at all.
Yeah, I think that's such an existential question, right? Like
Yeah.
how do you become aware of things you're not aware about? And also you can't change what you don't know. And so you're right, digging into those tools, going to therapy,
Mm.
exploring your Enneagram type. One of the things that stood out most to me about the Enneagram was the discussion about the pause, right? So we all have
Oh,
these
yeah.
default ways of acting and responding, and once you are aware of these patterns and these habitual responses that you have, then you can make that choice to pause and choose a different response. And I think
Mm.
oftentimes because we're in this constant state of hurry, we're operating on our default mode. And until we have that awareness of, oh, this isn't working for me, or this isn't working for the people that I love or that I'm in community with, they have to have that awareness to pause and then make an intentional decision to choose a different response.
Yeah. That's important. I mean, that's makes a huge difference between reacting and responding.
Yes.
And I love the idea of being a non-anxious presence in the world around me.
Mm,
And that's something I've been focusing on, as I've been on this journey, and incorporating practices and habits into my world that allow me to connect with myself and with my God and to have that peace. It's like, man, being that non-anxious presence in a world that's so anxious. You just pull up the news feed any day and it's like, man, it's all there. That takes intention. And that allows you to, instead of react, which is instantaneous, to pause, step back. Okay, what's going on here? Why am I taking this personally? What's triggering me here? And be like, is this about me? Or is
mhm.
this their issue? And then respond, right? Once you've had a chance to step back and think about, what's really going on in this situation. And most of the times, I don't know, would you agree that when we react to things, it's almost exclusively about us. And then somewhere inside of us, our quote unquote ego.
Oh, for sure. Right. The core
Yeah.
motivations, our core fears, those are habitual patterns that we get stuck in. So, Chris, I think one of the biggest connections of this culture of hurry is this socially acceptable feeling of overwork. And I think a lot of times people are workaholics. Work is their addiction, it's their poison, their
Mm.
drug of choice, and it's also rewarded and socially acceptable. And so it's okay for people to glorify work and overwork. How have you seen that manifest in the last couple of years,
Mm.
either with yourself or with your clients, or way back when you were feeling in the height of burnout?
Yeah. What is that about? Like, that's fascinating. I had a friend who spent some time in the Middle East, and he said, Chris, it's really fascinating that in the Middle East, they don't ask, what do you do? Like, that's what we do whenever we're in networking situations. Like, hey, what do you
Yeah.
do?
What do you
And it's
do?
like, that's right. That's our identity. In the
Yep.
Middle East, they ask, who are you?
Mm,
Which I think that's so simple, but I think it highlights, if America had an Enneagram type, it would very likely be a three.
that's exactly what I was going to
Threes
say.
are those. Right.
Yes.
You know it's an achiever mindset, right? Success at all costs. And I think that's part of what is behind overworking being glorified. There's this idea of success and um, success over fulfillment. Even with Tom Brady, when he won, I forget when this was, but one of his myriad of Super Bowls, it was one of the first. And it was like, he's like, well, now what? Right. He achieved success, but that didn't create fulfillment for him. And I think
Yeah.
that's a really important distinction to make. And Tim Tebow talks about this, the difference between success and fulfillment.
Hmm.
And success is an external thing. Somebody drew a line in the sand, or maybe you did, based on certain things. But then fulfillment is much more of an internal thing. Success can be future oriented, like I'm going to achieve or accomplish X in the future. But fulfillment is, again, it's an internal thing you can choose today. And that overworking, that over identifying with that, I think stems from the ego. And I'll define the ego as that part of us that is, there's this story we believe about ourselves from early on that
Hmm.
we want to satisfy certain needs, and chances are they don't serve, those needs don't serve us anymore, or going after them the way that we used to doesn't serve us anymore. And so I've coached plenty of business owners who just could not stop working, and what was behind it was very ego driven. And in some cases, what I mean by that is maybe their parents were at the core of that, saying, like, they wanted to please them or make them proud, and they just couldn't. If they stopped working, it meant that they weren't any good, they weren't worthy of
Hmm.
love for whatever reason, or they have to keep up with the Joneses, they have to, like, fear of missing out or something along those lines. But it is a badge of honor to be busy, and it's not healthy. I've seen coaching clients who have literally put themselves in the hospital. You mentioned the body keeps score. And when we overwork, when we work too much to the point where it causes us stress, our body feels that. It's
Yeah.
violent on our
Yep.
body and our hearts. And I've seen it literally put people in the hospital, and even cause serious like strokes. It's caused some friends of mine, one specifically, like, caused a stroke, and
Wow.
like,
Yeah.
or it seems to have at least contributed to it. So we overworking is something we really got to dive into and understand what's going on there.
Yeah. And I wonder too, how much of our identity is tied up in our work. And so we continue to
Yeah.
overwork because we're constantly trying to prove ourselves. We're trying to prove our worth.
Yeah.
I am what I do, right? Like that is
Yes.
the mindset of this, of what you and I are dubbing the Enneagram 3 America, that we are what we do. And it's going to take some work for us to pause, to slow down, to get self-reflective and kind of untangle ourselves from what we do. I personally,
Yeah.
so where I work, I have 2 degrees from. I have spent my entire adult life at this institution, and for quite a while that was my identity. And just in the past couple of years I've really begun to consider, who am I outside of what I do, and who am I outside of this place that has been my home for over 20
Yeah.
years. I'm really understanding that, and I hope that other people are able to pause and start to think about who are they, not just with what they do, but who are they, who is their identity when it's not tied to work.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw a post about, business being a certain type of business being a lifestyle. And it was talking about the entrepreneur and how, look, if you're going to own a business and be an entrepreneur, you got to be super passionate about it and be willing to take calls at certain hours and things like that. And, it was meant in good spirit. Right. So the post was, I understand what was being said, but I had to comment and say, well, you're right. And let's just be mindful that in an industry that this person was in, that is very, given to overworking and being available to their clientele at all hours of the night. I'm like, look, let's just be careful and be clear. You have worth outside of your business, and
Yes.
you've got to understand that, right? And so the question comes to, well, can we live a fulfilled life and a busy life? And
Yes.
I think
Can
the
we be
answer
busy and
is
fulfilled? Yeah.
yes, I think we can. I think it depends on how we define busy, and we've got to be careful. I think that comes from fulfillment. Comes from Yeah. Before I answer that, Adrian, let me ask you: where do you think fulfillment comes from?
I think fulfillment comes from really knowing yourself and knowing what makes you feel like you are thriving. When do you
Yeah,
feel engaged? When do you feel joyful? And I think it's cultivating that into your life so that way you're not just being busy and having things drain you constantly. Because when you're being busy with things that are fulfilling and bringing you joy and it's filling your bucket, even though it might be busy, I think that that's where that fulfillment comes. What about
yeah.
you? What do you think
I,
about that?
I agree as well. Fulfillment comes from truly understanding yourself. And we're going to talk about this in the next episode, but the idea of surrender and letting go of control and what are you trusting in? But when you understand whether it's, for me, it's my God, right? From a spiritual standpoint, I trust in a God outside of myself. And that's knowing that he's got my
Yeah,
back, and that I can let go of the control really allows me to understand who am I apart from what I am doing, and just focus on being. And so when you understand those things, and what your attachment maybe in an unhealthy way is to achievement, I think that you can get focused on what is truly matters. In fact, I was coaching one of my clients the other day, and we were talking about how there's a scripture about God gives you the desires of your heart. And I take that to mean he actually puts the desire in my heart. Not that
mm,
I want a Ferrari, so he's going to give me a Ferrari. It's that, no, he puts that desire, whatever that is, in there. And if we're so busy, if we're so distracted, if we're not slowing down and actually getting silent enough to actually understand what our heart desires really are, how could we pursue them? How could we ever be fulfilled?
absolutely.
And so I think that
Absolutely.
it's super important to understand what's at the center of our hearts, and those desires.
Yeah. If I can share a quick story about that. So last year, when I was teaching a
Please.
freshman seminar class, one of the first questions that I asked them on the first day of class was, "What do you want?" And a lot of them didn't know. Couple of them had lifelong aspirations of why they were in college and the career that they wanted to pursue. Some of them were like, I want a 4.0, right? Something that's very immediate and short term. But I wonder how many working professionals, if we were to ask them, or even in your coaching conversations, what do you want? How many people have really stopped and reflected and listened long enough to be able to answer that?
I will tell you, not many. I mean, even when I ask coaching clients, they don't know often when I first ask that. Now,
Yeah,
we'll get into this, and this is what part of what coaching is about, is that it helps to draw that out, right? And one of the things you can
absolutely.
do is actually ask yourself, okay, what do you want? Why is that important to you? Why is that important to you? Why is that important to you? Go 3 levels deep,
Yeah,
and eventually, if you're honest with yourself, you start to get to the emotion and the real reasons behind what it is that you really want. Oh, I want a 4.0. Well, why is that important to you? Well, it'll get me a good job. Why is that important to you? Oh, whatever. Why is that important to you? Well,
right.
I don't want to let my parents down, or whatever.
There we go.
So
Yep.
it's really right. Asking what the reason is behind all of that.
Yeah, and I love the coaching conversations because it can really help get people clear on what they want and to draw things out of
Mm-hmm.
them that they may have known were in there, but for them to be able to articulate it and really get clear on what they want and how to get there.
Okay, cool. I feel like we covered a lot right there.
Agreed.
Like I look at some of three. There's we kind of touched on four. Um, with we didn't really talk about the collective discontent, but I don't think that was necessary. I loved your questions and where you took that with overworking being glorified, and then can we be busy and fulfilled? That was all really good. Is there anything we missed
I don't
before
think
we
so. I
kind
think
of
that
wrap
covered
things
a
up?
lot of that. I mean, we talked about the worthiness, we talked about the value, we talked about the identity, we talked about not being able to change what we're not aware of. How many minutes in are we? Are we about 30 minutes in?
No, we're 38, but again,
Okay.
we've stopped quite a bit. So,
Okay.
um, let me. Where did we? I
Yeah. I
started.
mean, do we transition to takeaways
Yes.
and challenges and action
Y-
steps?
yes. Um, I would like to make a point about the pandemic and why that kind of brought this up. My thoughts
Sure.
on it, and
Yep.
I know there's plenty of articles on it, which I'll obviously said something like that. But then let's get into the conclusion. And I'm actually going to create a few things that I'm going to reference, like a hurry assessment based on ruthless elimination of hurry. There's a values exercise. Um, there's going to be some reflection questions. So my intention is to put this up on the website before this
Mhm.
airs, so that
Cool.
people can go there and give us their information and download that. So,
That's
um,
great.
all right, cool. And then we'll do a little bit of a preview, remind people to interact with us, and we'll wrap up. So, okay, ready?
Yeah.
Oops. Okay. And Adrian, it's really kind of fascinating. A lot of this stuff has come to the surface since COVID and the lockdown happened. And I've thought a lot about that, and I'd love to hear if your opinion differs. But what I think happened, now I'll be honest, I'm an introvert, and I could have stayed in our house for a very long time. But I know some folks that it literally, that are in my real estate sales business, and it killed them. It literally almost killed them. They could not stand it, and they were angry, and they needed to get out. But I could have stayed there a long time.
Mm.
And I think why this brought all this stuff to the surface was because it forced us to stop and slow down and actually start to listen to what was going on in our hearts. And I mean, I think that's part of what quiet quitting and all of that kind of stuff is about. Is we realized, we slowed down, we stopped, and we realized, I'm not happy. This isn't working. I don't like this. And people realize that, and they're like, okay, I got to do something different. Or maybe they didn't realize it consciously, but it's a subconscious hum just below the surface that they can't get rid of. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I actually have a little bit of a different perspective on that because when the pandemic hit, it didn't allow me to slow down. I had to amp up
Mm,
what I was doing. We were in the process of planning an in person orientation for thousands of students. And suddenly we had to figure out how do we plan a virtual orientation? And
wow.
then suddenly we were in rifts, a reduction in force. And so people were being laid off. And so we were operating on under resourced and understaffed staffs. And so for me, it wasn't, oh, I can kind of take my foot off the gas pedal and get introspective and look inside. It was like, holy shit, like I can't stop working. Like I have to get this done because A, everyone's job is in jeopardy. And B, we have to make this happen. And so I think I was in that period for about 2 years before I was able to pause and to
Mm,
get reflective. And so I think it maybe varied by industry. I think if you talk to any medical professionals, they probably
oh,
were not feeling like they had time to slow down. So
mm,
I really think it's a paradox. And I think it's so interesting. You know, you go ask any person, hey, what was your experience like in 2020? And you're going to have probably two very polar opposite stories, either the one that you
mm,
just shared or the ones where like, it was just nonstop work and I couldn't come up
Mm,
for air for
mm,
years, if they have even been able to now.
mm. I'm so glad you share that perspective, because either way, whether you slowed down and realized it wasn't working or things got worse,
Yeah.
that's not okay either. And you're like, this still is definitely, either way, it caused us to think, your situation or mine, like, this isn't working either
This is
way.
not okay.
Right.
Yep.
And
This is not
mm-mm,
sustainable.
nope, no, absolutely not. So, so as we think about what we've discussed today about the problem of losing our quote unquote soul with hurry and distraction and overworking and all the things that go into this as an entrepreneur and leader and business owner, um, I just want to encourage you to reflect on your own relationship with technology, the pace of life, and what is your connection with the business. And so, if there were one or two points that you wanted to make sure that everybody paid attention to, Adrian, what might that be today?
Well, I think I really, within that, want to issue a challenge because I recently read an article that said that nearly half of working Americans do not take their allocated or their allotted vacation days. And so when we think about everything that we talked about, being in this constant state of hurry, not necessarily knowing what it is that is fulfilling to us, not being able to compulsively check our phones, kind of want to marry those two together. And my challenge for our listeners would be schedule a vacation day and don't make any plans. And if that feels too scary, schedule maybe half a day. Choose 3 hours and don't make plans. You don't have to go on vacation, but take that time and just get quiet and think about what is fulfilling to you and just create a little bit of space to intentionally invest in yourself and kind of go back to some of those self-care principles.
I will echo that. I'm not going to put any other challenges out there to you all. I think that one is quite enough. And yeah, I would echo what Adrian said. So with that said, our first episode is coming to a close. I just want to encourage you all to check out a few resources we're going to have on our website. And that's going to be, going to be a hurry assessment. Hey, am I hurrying too much? What does that look like? What are some of the signs? And we're going to have an assessment to kind of figure that out and see where you're at. There's also going to be an exercise to figure out what your values are, understanding who you are and what are the top values that you have. There's going to be reflection questions, things like, hey, set aside 30 minutes and reflect on how hurry impacts your life, or, those things like setting your phone aside. So we'll have that all listed out on the website for you to check out. And so go there and visit that. And please let us know, what's your experience been with hurry and with the pace of life and workaholism and things like that. Is your business eating you up? How are you protecting yourself from that? And let us know what your questions are. We would absolutely love to field your questions. And like I said, at the end of the season, we're going to do a question and response. So if you audio record your question and send that to us, and also transcribe it to us in the email, it'd be super helpful. We would love to hear from you. So, great. Thank you so much for joining us. On our next episode, we're going to talk about the topic of surrender and how important that is, and how important surrender is as far as leadership goes and being an effective leader. And so, Adrian, thanks for being here with me, and everybody else, thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Chris. See you later. Bye.